All of our messages are based on the Bible, which is an accurate and truthful account of God and his interaction with mankind. So just this past week, a lot of us, observed Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, as we discovered last week, is the memorial or the anniversary of the destruction of the two temples. A number of things have happened to our people on that particular day, and so it is a very significant time in our history, and it is a time of fasting and sorrow. And consequently, the two Shabbats on either side of the Tisha B'Av are significant Shabbats. And as we looked into last week was Shabbat Chazon. Remember what that is? Shabbat Chazon is the Shabbat of vision, and it gets its name from the Haftorah portion in Isaiah chapter 1, where it is the vision, the Chazon of Isaiah, the son of Amoz. And that vision was given to him to give to a people, the people of Judah, the kings of Judah, and the people of Jerusalem, in a warning that the second temple, or the first temple, was going to be destroyed. And rightly enough, the rabbis and theologians struggle with why something like that so significant would happen. And as we observe Tisha B'Av, the rabbis and theologians try to grasp why we were in that situation where God's presence was taken from us in the form of the temple. And when we looked at it last week, Shabbat Chazon, we note that it really wasn't a vision that was to discourage, but rather encourage. Remember, the prophetic word, we've noticed there were three key points to it. One, that of a call to repentance, a genuine call for the people to return to the Lord. Second, the consequences if you didn't return to the Lord. And then finally, a restoration, comfort, a word of comfort. And so the message that Isaiah was giving, and as we discovered, was actually a call for the people to return. It was a real call and an expectation that God's presence is here with you now so that you need to experience it right now. And as we looked at Rabbi Levi's metaphor of the three suits, we saw that there was this great compassion, this great hope that we're supposed to see in the vision, a vision for the future. And as he said, we were looking forward to the third temple. But I think we discovered last week that this vision had twofold for us. One, that it was an encouragement to know that our God is with us now. Yes, that there is a future that's going to come. We have it all here in the book of Revelation. We've seen it and heard it in the prophets. But the encouragement and word for us today, the vision, Shabbat Chazon, was to tell us that God is here now. Experience his presence now. Don't forget, so focused, on his return, that we forgot that he's here with us. So that brings us to Shabbat Nachamu. Like Shabbat Chazon, it takes its name from its Haftorah portion. The Haftorah portion for this week is Isaiah 40. And it reads, "Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness. Make smooth in the desert highway for our God. Let every valley be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low, and let the rough ground become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley." Verse 5, "Then the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Comfort, O comfort my people. This is the Shabbat of comfort. And this word in our Haftorah is to comfort a people who are going to be in captivity and are in captivity. And it says, not just to the ones that are taken away in the Babylonian captivity, but rather Israel went into captivity first. Judah went after them. So the word is said that all of the wilderness will be made as if it was a plain. And so this redemption, this new exodus, if you will, is a word of hope and comfort to a people who are in captivity and away from God's presence. Truly a word of comfort at this point. Now, we've discovered in the past, too, that the prophetic word has a particular time in history that it's spoken. God gives it for a purpose in history so that it might be spoken to the people here, to the people that are going to be in captivity, and to return so that the second temple might be rebuilt. Last week, we observed Tisha B'Av. We know that the second temple no longer stands. This word has a particular message for the people at the time, but God's prophetic word is so powerful that it has ongoing consequences, ongoing revelation for the future. We're going to talk about that in a second, but it also has revelatory understanding for the past. So it speaks into the present, it speaks into the past, and it speaks into the future. Now, Isaiah chapter 40 now moves, and we generally, I think, when we come across sections like this, it reminds me of the book of Job. At the end of the book of Job, we hear how powerful our God is, that he is the creator of everything. Job comes to him, he wants to have an audience with the Lord, and Lord, you need to hear me, and he says, who are you to come to me? I'm the most powerful being I am who I am, right? And so we get a section like this in Isaiah chapter 40, after it's called to the redemption, verse 12. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens in the span, and calculated the dust of the earth at the measure, and weighed the mountains in a balance, and the hills in a pair of scales? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or who has, or as his counselor, has informed him? With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding, and who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him in the knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding? Rhetorical, no one, right? He is the powerful God. We just generally say, okay, well, that's just to encourage us because he's the one that's going to bring us back. It's actually drawing us to what? Back to Job. He's got this whole powerful God. He's the creator of all. He takes us back to the very beginning, back in Genesis. Remember last week we discussed Genesis, God's presence. He created the Garden of Eden. He created everything so that he might have communion with his creation and his people. So this isn't just to remind us that he's a powerful God, but to take us all the way back to creation. And the idea that he spoke creation into existence, right? With a word, all of creation came into existence. Our portion here says, verse 5, the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Not only does he speak creation into existence, but what's this picture of comfort, comfort my people? Isaiah 40 is talking about a redemption. He speaks redemption into existence as well. The Lord has spoken. At the end of this portion, the Haftorah, in verse 26, lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their hosts by number. He calls them by name because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power. Not one of them is missing. So this God of creation, this all-powerful God who can do whatever he wants, casts the stars across the heavens, and he knows each and every single one of them by name. Each and every single. Our God's so powerful, you would think that he would be well above that idea, that he knows the stars by name. I couldn't help but be drawn back to Genesis and Avram. Genesis 12, it enters into covenant, says to Abraham, what? I will give you a land. I will give you a seed, a nation, descendants, right? I will give you blessing. What else? All the nations through this relationship will be blessed. Genesis 15, with Avram trying to struggle with this whole idea of, well, I don't even have a son yet. God says, come here. Avram, I want you to come outside your tent. I want you to this isn't night. He goes, I want you to take a look up at the sky. How many have been to the desert or been out on the ocean? You look at the night sky, a lot of stars out there. Not nearly as many as they're all out there, but we just can't see them. Imagine on Avram's time, the amount of stars that he's seeing. God's saying to him, he says, come on out. Well, here, let's see what he says. Genesis 15, verse 5. And he took him outside and said, now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. Here God is the creator of everything. He knows every single one of these stars by name, taking Abraham out, having entered into this covenant relationship with him. He says, come on out here. I want you to look at the stars. See these stars? I know every single one of these by name. And I know, in essence, that these are going to be your descendants. These are going to be the people that are brought in to a relationship through our relationship. So it includes Israel and includes even more. So this Haftorah portion is a grand picture of hope. It spoke to a time for the people to be returned, a great return to the land of Israel, but we're reminded that God is the creator and that his heart isn't just to create or redeem just a portion of his creation, but rather all of his creation. Who couldn't think, when I read in Isaiah 40, verse 3, a voice is calling, clear a way for the Lord in the wilderness. Who comes to mind? John the Mercer, Yochanan the Mercer, John the Baptist, right? And he was the herald. He was the one who preceded whom? Yeshua, the Messiah, right? Last week, again, we discovered that one of the traditions for Tisha B'Av was that the Messiah was to come on Tisha B'Av. Why? Because he was going to take our greatest mourning and turn it into joy. The lowest point in our history as a people, that is God's presence being removed, the Messiah is going to bring and usher in that presence once again. So here, in our portion, Nachamu, God is revealing that he is the creator and that his heart, that he spoke creation into existence, and he also speaks redemption into existence. John, herald, Yeshua came. We have the proof in Acts chapter 2, and that God's presence returned to his people. Remember last week, again, we talked about the fact that it's really, the picture of the temples is the departure of God's presence from among his people. But we know that yet the two temples were destroyed, his presence is here. As Messianic believers, we know in Acts chapter 2, and evidence that it happened, that the Messiah came and that God's presence came back to his creation. So this is a huge, huge picture of redemption. Yes, it spoke at the time in Isaiah to a people that were going to be brought back. And what else does it say? The glory of the Lord will be revealed to all flesh, all of flesh. Now, it was a big picture for the people returning from captivity because all these other nations, Persia, Assyria, Babylonians, would see the return of God's people to their land. But today, all flesh is going to see the presence of God returning to his people and dwelling again with his creation. Yeah, we can be happy. So, the cool thing about verse 26, again, is that this God who is the creator, who spoke creation into existence, who cast the skies, or cast the stars across the heavens, knows each and every one of those by name. Last week I talked about God's presence returning to his people, and we, as this God's presence as the suit, returning to the body of Messiah. Here he says, I'm so big, but I'm still interested in every single one of you. How many are one of the descendants of Abraham in this room? Through that relationship, right? He knows each and every single one of us. In fact, he knew, Jeremiah says, he knew me before I was created in the womb. He knows every single strand of hair on my head. And so if this presence of God returning is what Yeshua spoke about, he spoke about most in his ministry, which was the kingdom of heaven. And he said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And we know that that was God's presence coming back. And that was his presence dwelling in the body. Today, we're talking about the individual. We know that he indwells each and every one of us. So what is God's kingdom before we get into that? What is God's kingdom? I gave you a little bit of a hint. Some of you were here last night, so you might jump on it. You can write this down if you want. The kingdom is our God's presence actively redeeming creation. The kingdom is our God's presence actively redeeming creation. He spoke everything into existence, and it's his intent, as we read in Revelation, that he would recreate it all. But he has given us the Messiah who ushered in the coming again of his presence into our lives. Acts chapter 2 again. Now, that's a great message for the body. Remember, last week we were excited about that we needed to spread the kingdom. But one of the reasons, I had an idea, I'm not going to do it. The kingdom needs to, now we understand it as a body, but for us to fully understand it and be effective of a body, if we are to work together as a body and spread his kingdom to others, remember, what was the strategy, the kingdom strategy that we discovered last week? Yeshua gave it to us. We got it from Mark 16, the proclamation of the good news. Matthew 28, discipleship. And John 14, the Father's love, right? So this is the strategy. Mark 16, the proclamation of the good news, was our offensive strategy. Matthew 28, the discipleship, is our fortification or our defensive strategy. This is for the spreading of the kingdom. And John, the love of the Father, is what? Ammunition, right? It's the tools or the weapons that we are to use. Love, the love of the Father. So if we're to go out and do that, and we believe that as a body, this is the hope for those that we come into contact with, we need to realize something first. That if he can recreate creation, for his presence to dwell, he needs to start with us. His presence has to come to us. That strategy has to apply to us. We have to understand it personally so that we can share it with others in the body, with others outside the body. So if we really believe that he's recreating creation, he has to come and recreate us. So the good news, how does that apply to to us. The good news. What is the good news? His presence dwelling in us. Is that really good news? Is it really good news? Are you sure? Because it sounds like good news. God's presence dwelling in each and every one of us. But let's go back to the Mishkan real quick, the tabernacle. We know that when God's presence, he's a holy God. He's a completely holy and sinless God. But for him to dwell in the presence of the people, first of all, even in the tabernacle which they constructed, they had to cleanse the implements. They had to sanctify them. Atonement had to come. I mean, we read, and this is why it gets a bad rap, we read things about people being consumed of fire because of sin, right? His presence coming into a non-holy place can be pretty dangerous. So I ask you again, do you really believe the good news is good news? Okay. Because if you believe that, you have to cleanse every single corner, every single nook, every single cranny, so that his presence can dwell in your lives. In the cleaning, in the cleansing of the temple or the tabernacle, in the preparation for his presence, they had to atone for the implements. Why did they have to do that? Because of sin. Sin gets on stuff. Sin isn't just this ethereal thing. It actually gets on things. So they had to cleanse and get rid of the sin so that God's holy presence could dwell in there without fireworks. But what else is sin? What else does sin cause? Well, death, disease, sickness, right? Separation, but the sin, it causes sickness and disease. So God's presence coming in, as we see the preparations coming so that his presence could come in by his directive, is a picture of healing. God's presence brings healing to where he is. I remember growing up, scuffing the knee, get gravel in it, cut my hand or something like that. And I'd go to Mom and be like, Mom, I'm hurt. Can you fix me up? Kind of thing. But you know what? Getting the gravel out and fixing that wound is not fun. It hurts. You get a cut on your hand and you're like, okay, Mom, go ahead. And then you're like, ugh. Your first thing is to keep it and hold it back in, right? But then you trust her, and then you give her your hand. She cleans out. It hurts for a little bit. And then I don't know what your moms did, but my mom took that hydrogen peroxide, poured it in there. You did not look. I'd rather have dirt in there than that hydrogen peroxide. But you know what? She blew on it, kept blowing till the stinging stopped, and so that the healing could take place. So God's presence in our lives, we say that we're excited. We know that this is good news and that we're happy about it. But how many are going like this? This area, he doesn't need to fix that area. He doesn't need to heal that area because I'm okay. I got it. So I ask you again, is the good news really good news to you? Because that means everything. His presence needs to penetrate everything so that healing could come. And healing's a good thing. We often think, okay, well, practicing God's presence and being with him means I can't go, out with my buddies. I can't do that kind of stuff. Maybe. But what? Healing is good. God created us, right? He's the creator of everything. So he knows what is best for his children. So we can trust him knowing that it might be painful at first, but healing's going to come. So we need to understand that, because if we're going to go ahead and give the good news of God's presence in your life, And we're going to tell somebody else God's presence in your life is going to be transformative, and the healing that's going to come is going to build you up and not tear you down. We have to understand it for ourselves. Custom fit. Now, we know that it's not just the physical healing of disease. There's so much more, right? I want to jump to Psalm 147 real quick. Verse 1, praise the Lord, for it is good to sing praises to our God, for it is pleasant, and praise is becoming. Verse 2, the Lord builds up Jerusalem. He gathers the outcast of Israel, much like our message here. Verse 3, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He counts the number of stars. He gives names to them all. Not only is he there to heal our sickness, our disease, but he's there to bind up the brokenhearted. He's there to restore relationships, redeem every area of our life. Again, the stars of the heaven. He knows each and every one of them by name. That picture is there so that we know the Creator is concerned for each and every one of us in a very personal manner. Next step, discipleship. What's discipleship? Discipleship would be that application of his presence in our lives. What is the kingdom? The kingdom is our God's presence actively redeeming creation. There's going to be a test. So the discipleship, the defense, the fortification is the application of his presence in our lives. Yeshua walked the earth. He, like any rabbi, had disciples, Talmidim. They followed him around. Not just his disciples, but any disciple of a rabbi would observe a rabbi. They would reproduce his teachings. They would copy pretty much everything he did in their lives. They'd see it, they'd do it. They'd see it, they'd do it. They hear it, they'd do it. Yeshua's disciples had that exact same relationship. They'd see what he was doing, they'd hear what he was teaching, and they would do it. Yeshua, the living Word, walking among men, gave a Sermon on the Mount. He filled God's Word to overflowing. He crammed so much in there. He gave the heart of it, the depth of God's life in this Word, as he even just walked around for the disciples to see. And he says at the end of his Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against the house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and slammed against the house, and it fell. And great was its fall. So he's saying that you hear what I'm saying. You hear what this word says. He's the living Word. You see what I'm doing, and you comprehend it, but you don't do it. When the times of tribulation, when that rain and that storm comes, you're going to fall. Both of them could have really good-looking houses, right? Because they heard the message. You look good, you look like you've got it down, but if you don't practice, if you don't behave like a disciple, a Talmidim, and act on what he's been teaching us, then when it comes time for the tribulation, remember, there's a tribulation. We read the end of the book. When those times come, great might be the fall if you're not practicing or fortifying your life, actually doing what he says to do. Doesn't have to be the Great Tribulation. It can be what we experience here today in our lives. It's definitely a call, Shema. Shema. And then our response is, all that you've said, we will do. That's discipleship. One of the things that was so awesome, Yeshua, of course, he's bringing in and speaking about the kingdom of heaven, God actually walking among us. What is the kingdom? God's presence, actively redeeming creation. So here's God's presence walking around. And what does God's presence do? It heals. So here's the perfect kingdom walker, God, walking around, and everybody that came to him was healed. Everybody. So God's presence brings healing, brings redemption, brings rebirth, brings recreation. That's God's presence dwelling in us. Acts chapter 2, remember? So that means we need to talk about our weapons. Joshua went into the promised land to conquer the land. He had swords, he had spears and shields. He battled flesh. We read in Ephesians last week, it wasn't flesh that we war against. So love is what? In the strategy. Our tools. How to conquer the kingdom for God. Love. That's how we do it. God, in an act of love, spoke creation into existence. His love for his creation, he said, I want to be with you. I provided a place. So in love, he gave us existence, just at that. Isaiah 40, he spoke redemption into existence so that his presence could dwell with us. He did that through love. That's an act of love. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave. So our example is that for God to act, for creation, for redemption, for laying down your life for someone else, all of these are acts of love. So we need to follow that and understand that's what informs everything. The good news. We have to understand that the good news came in love. We have to know that God's presence, that he wants to dwell in us, that healing is not just something to get rid of, something that God didn't approve of in our lives, but realize that it is a true act of love and compassion to us because God wants so much more for us. He wants life and life abundant for each and every one of us. We also then have to look at our discipleship. Well, you know what, I got to read the Bible, and that gives me stuff that, of course, I'm not comfortable with. I don't know if I want to do that today, or even spend time in his presence, or that kind of stuff, because I got this other stuff to do. If we don't understand that even in that, in God training us up, and God fortifying our lives is an act of love, then how can we go ahead and teach others that God's presence needs to dwell in your life, and your life is going to change, and that when tribulation comes, when trials come, it's like, oh, we love you, but I'm just going to send you out into the wilderness and let you figure it out on your own. God doesn't do that. He's given us every ability to be prepared and ready for what he has, what's in store for us. And that's an act of love. So when we speak the gospel, when we speak the good news, it has to be informed in love. Because when we understand it for ourselves, then we can express it to somebody else. When we speak about discipleship, we know how hard it was for us to get up in the morning and spend time with God in his word. We know how difficult it is, so we don't just go to the person, you know what, you need to be getting up and doing that. We can say, I know it's hard. I saw it in my life, but this is what the Lord taught me. It might minister to you. I don't know. It has to be out of love. So the kingdom is our God's presence actively redeeming his creation. That's how big this is. That's how big Isaiah 40 is. A voice crying in the wilderness, the herald of Messiah coming. It is for here and now. It isn't just that future redemption of the book of Revelation. It is God's presence actively now in his people redeeming his creation. That means wherever I walk, the ground under my feet is being redeemed for God. Being redeemed because his presence is in me. Not only that, every word that I speak into each relationship, being redeemed. Right? Every area, every thought, every body, every atom, every cell. This is the Creator. Every heart, every soul. Whatever was lost, whether it be understanding, whether it be time, whether it be love, all of it redeemed. We bring that with us because we have God's presence dwelling in us. And it's his presence that we get to walk with. We get to cooperate with the Creator of all in the redemption of this world. Wow! Seriously? Wow! This month of Av is also called Menachem. Menachem is the comforter of the Father. It is a month where we observe Tisha B'Av, very solemn, and it should be, sad time that we realize that God's presence had to be removed from his people and his creation. But we call it Menachem, the comforter of the Father. How could this month be of any comfort to God in that he had to leave his creation that he spoke into existence in love, that he speaks redemption to? It's exactly because it's on the cosmic level that the herald came, that the Messiah came, that his presence dwells in us, that it shows that a heart of the Father is truly for our lives to be rich and full. We think of it as a benefit to us. We think God's presence returning here and him dwelling in us and working in us is a benefit to us. It truly is. But the heart of a father is such a comfort to see the maturation, to see his children reach the success that he's created them to be. He threw the stars across the sky. He knew each and every single one of them by name. He knows the potential in each and every one of his loved ones, one of his children's lives. He knows that potential better than we do. And when we can reach it, when we say, Father, dwell in us, when we say, Father, teach me the way, and that he can see us, any proud father, when your son hits it out of the park, I taught him that, right? It is a comfort to him to know that he is able to return, that our greatest sorrow, that it was that we lost his presence, but that it is a joy for him to return, that our greatest sorrow and joy for him is to change our greatest sorrow, which is his greatest sorrow, into the greatest joy. Please stand to your feet. Now, we know that God's presence wants to dwell in the body of Messiah. We know that he wants to dwell in each and every single one of us. He gave us a kingdom strategy. One of the good news, one of discipleship, and one of love. And so, maybe, as we were talking, that you realize, I do accept that healing. It is exciting that your presence is within me. It's an exciting thing, Lord, but, I really have kept this little thing over here. Whether it be unforgiveness, whether it be something that you just keep for yourself. Oh, Lord, it's a little sin. I want to keep it, it's not going to affect what I say and how I talk about you. When this song is playing, I want you to come to the altar. And I want you to practice being a disciple. I want you to lay that down here at this altar. I want you to say, Lord, I'm going to follow your instruction because I know that you love me. I know that you have such great plans for my life, and I want to have that life full and rich with your presence. I don't want to keep a hold of this because it's keeping me from what you've created me to be. So the act of discipleship would be walking up here. You could do it at your seat. You could. And if you have to, you have to. But to be a disciple, I'm challenging you today to come and lay it down. Invite the Lord to reign completely in your life. Allow him to smother you with his love, with his presence. And when you leave it. Don't pick it up again. Just leave it there. As this song ministers, and when you come up, I'm going to anoint you. The oil is a symbol of God's Spirit, of his presence in your life. So I'm going to remind you, as I anoint you, that this is God's Spirit dwelling in you. His presence changing your life. We're going to be talking about him reigning in your life. So when you're ready, as this song's playing, please come forward.